So, what I'm going to do in my presentation, 20 minutes or so, is say a little bit about my understanding of knowledge mobilization, to give you a flavor of what we do at IRIS, and then, because for me this is very important, to draw some connections between our perspective on knowledge mobilization and parallel developments in policy and practice, particularly in relation to social care. So if I'd remembered to do that fast enough, that's where we'd have got to. So this is very much a personal perspective. I'm not demanding that the whole of IRIS own my view, but it is very much informed both by working there for the last 5.5 years and previous 4 years working at Research in Practice for Adults, an English-based organization. And I think I need to let you into a secret. I had worked with Research in Practice for 4 years in what I now understand to be knowledge mobilization, but I didn't know that that was what I was doing. It was only when I came back to Scotland and got immersed in terminology around knowledge management, knowledge transfer, knowledge exchange, that suddenly the penny dropped that these sorts of things might be something to do with me. Because, as in my Twitter handle, I am passionate about getting research into practice, but also about getting practice into research. So I was very warmed when Peter suggested that we need to soften up on the language a little, because I do think very often it can be quite alienating, and also it tends to separate us out into our different silos. Someone from Canada was telling me about the very different interpretations of different semantics that would be had there. But for me, traditionally, a lot of the debate has been very much, as I've tried to represent in this picture, very much dominated by thou shalt use this knowledge. You shall understand, you must use knowledge. A bit along the lines of, you've got to eat your greens. It's been a push model, it's been linear, and, well, my thunder has already been stolen on this, but it's been dominated by vast range of, frankly, when you first get involved in this business, pretty confusing diagrams. I'm certainly not the first to suggest that the world, particularly perhaps, but not exclusively, of social care is much messier than this. As long ago as 1979, if any of you were even born then, Carol Weiss recognized it is not one of linear order from research to decision, but a disorderly set of interconnections and back and forwardness that defies a neat diagram. For me, this whole world is dynamic, it's multidirectional, it's much like the spaghetti junction of this particular picture. Yet, I sort of sense that the knowledge mobilization world can be remarkably reluctant to practice what it preaches, to actually be guided by the research evidence that comes from that field. Recently, I've been doing some work with John Gabay and Andre Lemay, who, for those of you in the health field, may be familiar with their work on mind lines. And very recently, Tricia Greenhall and a colleague have published a sort of review of the extent to which that work, derived from how GPs work, how, if at all, they access evidence, I think is absolutely invaluable learning, but how much do we take it on board? So, what is IRIS? Its Sunday name, the Institute for Research and Innovation in Social Services. We're a smallish third sector organization. We support the social services workforce to support positive outcomes for people. Rolls off the tongue. We aim to do this through the use of evidence, through innovation, through creativity, and we could have a whole debate about the relationship between those different elements. We are indeed funded by Scottish Government, but I always immediately follow that by a proviso that actually, not quite they let us do what we want, but they certainly don't tell us what to do. And we have a very eclectic, interesting mix of skills. We have 3 teams: an evidence-informed practice team, an innovation and improvement team, and a knowledge media team. And we also work very much to the mantra of evidence-informed practice. And some of you will know exactly what that means. I often explain it as a 3-legged stool: evidence which attempts to meld together the best available academic research evidence, but also gives equal weight to the lived experience of people and to the tacit wisdom of practitioners. Just as a sideline, I'm extremely jealous that our colleagues in Wales have come up with the new mantra of evidence-enriched practice, which I think is perhaps even more appropriate as a description. So I won't dwell too long on the whole range of our activities. For those of you who are interested, you can access them through our website. But this, a couple of years back, was our attempt to try and summarize some of our activities, particularly around the use of evidence. So in terms of awareness and access, the one to the far left, we produce hopefully accessible, authoritative evidence summaries in the form of insights. We have a network of champions, we run events, we work with students to try and hopefully embed a culture of using evidence. We also try and promote skills and confidence in this field. We are particularly keen on promoting practitioner research. We've done a number of projects in that area, supporting people. We developed a self-evaluation peer support network, and we have also developed a body of work around social assets in action, which is working very much with practitioners, because most of our work is in partnership, at least with practitioners, and very often with people with lived experience also. Work around embedding. We have a whole series of projects around leading for outcomes. Again, trying to work at the front line with busy practitioners to enable what in social services had been quite a sea change in the way of working. We also have a body of work which goes under the title Pilot Light, and these are about developing pathways for self-directed support, which for those of you from England is very much our model of personalisation. And I'll say a little bit more about how we work in that sort of field in a moment. And then enhancing the quality and range of the evidence base. One of the projects we highlight in respect of that is, in fact, quite interestingly, a community research project with young people, which was, in fact, done with Who Cares Scotland. And for those of you who are familiar with the 8 archetypes that Sandra Nutley and her colleagues have developed, she may talk more about them tomorrow, I think we feel that we have at least some elements of most of them. Push, brokering, we certainly advocate, we develop networks, and we also reflect, perhaps sometimes too much, on the process itself. And some of you may also have had the opportunity to hear from Catherine Rose, who had one of the posters, about how we too have been looking at the impact of our activities through the lens of contribution analysis. We try and be innovative and use various creative ways: storytelling, social labs, digital animation, video, Iris FM, which is really a different way of packaging podcasts, Mindreel, which, if any of you ever have a spare evening, is actually a collection of films that were submitted to the Festival on Mental Health each year in Scotland, a fascinating resource which doesn't need to feel as if it's anything to do with work. And we also have a creative in residence. But I suppose after a couple of years developing that sort of agenda, we decided that we really needed to expand our horizons. And I suppose that's the recognition that knowledge mobilization is really, at its heart, about interaction. It is relationships that are indeed the key. And one of our projects, in fact, is called Relationships Matter. I think also a particular facet of social services is that social work decision-making is very complex. It cannot very often be reduced to a formulaic set of guidelines or seen as a rather separate knowledge activity. Social care professionals, in our experience, really have to embed and use knowledge daily in their everyday life. So the notion that one can somehow access separately the sort of guidance that you might be required is a little alien. It's not really about checking the dosage for hypertension. It's much more about, am I making the right decision to take this child into care? And I'm not sure that without your whole lifetime of gathered knowledge, experience, you are able to access that decision from elsewhere. There's a very nice quote from a paper by Heather Wilkinson and her colleagues at Edinburgh. It's about what gets through people's radars. So for us, it's about co-production of knowledge and co-production of practice. And we feel that these perhaps are inseparable. Sorry, I'll just go back to that. I just wanted to mention the sort of nature of these projects. The introduction over the last 2-3 years, very much of co-design into our work. We have recruited 3 service designers, a profession I'd never heard of when I joined Iris, but people who would traditionally design products and who now may well look at processes. And with the skills of such people, we now very often are working in a co-design team, which for us places the individual, the person with lived experience, whether it's as a young person leaving care, someone with mental health issues, a frail older person, we place them at the heart of the process and work in a team to try and address issues. And just to give you one example very quickly, Hospital to Home is a project in Tayside which is really trying to crack that wicked issue that has been around for decades about hospital discharge, how we can make a decent discharge from hospital to home. Now, we have volumes of evidence on that. The evidence is not in short supply. But unless we are able to motivate staff, individuals, to really respond to the implications of using that evidence, we will not move forward. So that is really a principle that underlines a lot of our projects. We hate the word co-production. It's another bit of jargon throwing into the sort of knowledge mobilization world. But really, it's about working together. But for us, the working together has to involve people themselves, not just professionals. And if you find the word co-production just being used instead of partnership working, that for us is not what it's all about. So just in the final few minutes, I want to suggest we can draw some parallels between the co-production of knowledge mobilization and this contemporary concern, because it is very much the mantra of the moment, for co-production in social services. So, for example, we have, certainly here in Scotland, but reflected in England, the drive for greater choice and control by the individual, for self-management. And in Scotland, this is manifest in the Self-Directed Support Act, which has now been in operation for 12 months. Engagement, co-production, looking at people's assets, very much a mantra, again, in Scotland at the moment, rather than their deficits. And if I dare to suggest that perhaps traditionally evidence-based medicine has been very much a deficit model. Patients, clinicians don't know and must be brought to know. Again, delivering on integrated health and social care, current act in Scotland came into force on the 1st of April. We know all about the evidence. Indeed, we at IRIS have contributed to the evidence reviews. But really, until we work with teams on the ground to make real these 6 elements, which we know are absolutely essential to delivering a better life for individuals, we're really just fiddling on the margins. So, I suppose this would be the recipe from IRIS. Cultivate partnerships, networks are key. Develop a unique identity as you work with people. The power of co-design and co-working, starting where people are at, etc. It takes time. You need to have boundless optimism, but let's make it fun as we do it. Thanks very much.
Any questions for Alison? Yes?
Oh, thank you very much. Could you say you've been able to influence the big foot media, like the mainstream media, who compete for policy attention? To what extent have you been able to sort of influence them?
I think we would like to think that we've had some modest influence on it. I suppose, talking about the integration example, you never know, because it's the contribution rather than the attribution issue. But we were certainly quite pleased when the government in Scotland moved away from a total reorganisation model that it had been advocating for. Now, I would hate, I certainly wouldn't be suggesting that that was because of the work we'd done, but one hopes that it's the drip, it's the feeding into that melting pot, it's alerting people, and it is actually quite easy in Scotland to get close to policy people. I sometimes think the person that was saying about the viral nature, it can also have a downside in that you can perhaps frighteningly influence people, but we would like to think so. But the person to talk to might be Catherine Rose, because she's been doing this independent evaluation, and she may be able to tell you more accurately.
We've got time for one more question. Peter. They won't be able to hear you.
Thank you. Brilliant. And you remind me of the roots of knowledge mobilization in Canada came out of evaluation of community university research alliances back in the 90s. You talk about making it fun. Why is it so difficult for people to accept that play is actually an effective way of working, and that if you're having fun at what you're doing, you must not be serious? So how do you bring the fun back into the work?
Great question.
I'm not sure I can answer it, but I will tell you a little anecdote. One of the service design people that we interviewed, in fact, the person that's leading on the work on hospital discharge, when we interviewed her, she came and told us she was at that stage working on sort of germs in hospitals. And she told us about how she got the consultants to play with plasticine. And I thought, my goodness, if you can get consultants in hospitals to play with plasticine, you're someone that we want. So we spend our money on Lego. That's a sort of slightly flippant answer, but I also think fun breeds fun. If people find that actually working with this, who on earth are these people, this intermediary organization, don't really know what they do, but if they then find out that playing with us is fun, with Who Cares, we produced a cartoon, sort of, comic as the sort of output. I think, let's bring the fun back in. You do have to endure, as someone was suggesting earlier, some slightly sort of raised eyebrows from some of the more, traditional quarters. But hey, I've done all that, so I'm afraid I'm a bit, let's try it.
And sometimes raised eyebrows can be a good thing, right? Fantastic. Thank you very much, Alison.